Hey guys, I'm Blake. This is Katie. This is our shop. This is our gym. This is Dominion Strength Training. And today we're going to be talking about belts in general, how we make them, what we make them out of, and specifically the starting strength single ply and double ply belts.
We met in Atlanta. We're both from that area. I worked at the CDC, and I was a microbiologist and working out at a CrossFit gym.
So I worked as a mechanical engineer. I was also really into CrossFit. Pretty quickly figured out that I am no good at metcons whatsoever. But compared to the other people there, I was reasonably strong. I started specializing in weight training, and one of the first things I came around to needing was a belt. And that's kind of how this started. I needed a good belt, I needed it quick, and I started looking around, and there really weren't any good options other than, some of the stuff that we're going to talk about that are just not good quality belts. The good stuff that you could buy, you'd have to wait a very long time for. 6-8 weeks, depending on what it was. And I just couldn't figure out why there wasn't a good option that you could also get fast. Maybe it's limited in the options or something like that, but it's still a high quality belt. We started actually sourcing a belt. This is one of the original ones, sourcing them overseas, having them shipped to us, and then we would ship them out to customers. That worked for a little while. The problem with the overseas suppliers is the consistency of the quality. So we ended up about 2 years into this getting a shipment of belts at Christmas time, 100% of which had rust completely on all the hardware.
Yeah.
So the rivets were rusted up, the buckles were rusted up, and we had 1,000 belts that we couldn't sell the first one of. So that Christmas we spent in our friend's garage with no heat in Georgia, so it was freezing outside, using their drill press to drill out every one of these rivets, which Katie did the lion's share of.
I think I drilled, I'd never, as a microbiologist, I had never used even a drill, which Blake realized once we started making belts together that I had no skills as far as that goes. But we had to kind of learn quickly. And after repairing 1,000 of them, I think I jokingly said, I'm so upset by the quality and the quality control, we could make this better ourselves. And Blake took that.
At that point, it was kind of a decision.
Yeah.
Is Dominion Strength still going to be a thing, or is it just going to go away?
Yeah.
Either way, the overseas thing was not going to work. After spending Christmas replacing hardware on 1,000 belts, we're like, no matter what, we're not going through this again. So we started thinking, could we make this ourselves? Is there enough of a business here that we could do this ourselves? It would have to be full-time. Could it pay us enough? And it's taken us a long while. We've been here in this shop a little over 2 years now, but we're now at a point that we're doing enough volume in the belts that both of us were able to quit our jobs, and we're making these belts full-time. Once we made the decision to try to go forward with making these ourselves, the first question is, how do you make a belt? And we actually had a friend, he lives in Tennessee, he's one of these guys that makes super custom knife sheaths and all kinds of different stuff. It'll take him a year to get you something because he makes just highly custom, really nice stuff, and he's always backed up. And he was gracious enough to give us a weekend. We went up to see him, and he taught us, as much as you can in 2 days about leather work in general and belts specifically. And just from there, a lot of buying raw material and practice and screw-ups on our end, we eventually got to the point where we can make, what you see now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we've come a long way. When we started, we were hand punching every single hole ourselves, which I think I maxed out at about 3 belts, and I'm done for the day. I get like tendonitis, and I'm done. Blake has 10, so we upgraded quite a bit with machinery, and you'll see that when we make our belts later.
Yeah, when we were making 1 or 2 belts, you can get away with a lot. You can hand cut this, you can hand punch holes. But if you got to make 10 or 20 of them, machinery makes a big difference.
Right.
When we first talked to Mark Ripito, he had some very specific things that he wanted in a belt. The first one, the single ply, starting strength is all about simple, hard, effective, minimum effective dose, that kind of thing. And this is about, in terms of belts, as minimalist as you're going to get, that'll do a great job for you. He wanted a double ply belt that had no suede on it. He says he doesn't like the way it wears, he doesn't like the way it looks after time, so he wanted an all leather stitched and oiled belt, and so that's what we came up with for him for starting strength.
Yeah, so we get contacted by a lot of fans of Mark Ripito, which we love, and I get a lot of questions for customizations and whatnot. And just so you know that he was really a part of every part of both belts. So if you're getting a starting strength belt, you're getting a belt that Rip would have made himself. So you've made the right choice.
The most important thing to start with is the material that we use. So we use top grain leathers to make these belts. If you think about a cowhide, it's basically 3 layers. The outermost grain is something called the full grain. The middle grain is what we use, that's the top grain. And then the bottom part, which is not really a structural leather, that's something called the split grain. The full grain is something that is taken off the top of the hide. It's got all the natural markings. It's used for like high-end bags, saddlery, stuff like that. It's a lot more expensive than you would see on a weightlifting belt. We want the structural leather, but we don't need the aesthetics of that full grain. One thing that you'll see on some of these overseas belts is they will actually use this split leather, and you can see it on this belt here. It's white and fibrous looking, and the way to think about this is the looser that those fibers are in the leather, the more they're going to work over time and stretch and wear out. So this is an inexpensive leather, which is why they use it, but it's not a structural grade leather that you want to see on a weightlifting belt. And one thing you got to be careful of, I cut into this belt so you can see what it is, but if you look like in the buckle area, and if this still had the part with the holes and everything, you'd be able to see that they go in here and they dye this brown so that it looks like you're getting a top grain leather when in fact you're not. So you got to be careful with that. This is a band knife splitter. So it's got a knife that's running around in an oval. You've got a fixed blade, and when you adjust, you're setting the top roller position. The bottom roller can move out of the way to expose the leather to the blade.
Sure.
So you can set any precise, thickness you want, feed it through, and it'll split it off. Anytime you want to reduce the thickness or shave down a certain area, use a machine like this. I'll show you just on a random piece of leather what this guy can do. This is like a full thickness piece. So this guy is just an easy way to take a piece of leather down to any thickness you want without having to do a bunch of stuff by hand. Yeah, so now we're going to oil these guys up. This first guy is a single ply. This is the underside. And then we've got both pieces of what will become a double ply belt. We use 2 different types of oils. On the inside of the belt, we just use a plain neat's foot oil. On the outside, on the double ply, we'll use a tinted oil. You'll see that in a second.
It's a lot darker.
It's just oil that's had some pigment added to it to give you a little bit more color than you would otherwise get with the neat's foot. In terms of process, this leather would have come in on pallets. We would have already had it strap cut to 3 inches, and then we would pull it out, we would grade it. So like we showed you earlier, any imperfections, that would get thrown into a scrap pile to have something else made out of it, and this would be the leather that we'd make belts out of. From there, we're going to cut it based on what size belt it's going to be, so we'll rough cut it to length, we'll final cut it later, and then at this point, if any pieces need to have been run through the splitter, so like at the buckle end where that has to be thinned down, and also the entire length for a double ply, we take a little bit of that off so it's not more than 10 millimeters once put together. All of that has been done at this point, and then this is the stage where we'll oil the belt up so it gets the color of the finished belt, and also it treats it a little bit.
A starting strength double ply belt is going to be a little bit darker than a single ply, not only because the top is a piece of skirting, it's just a different piece of leather than the single ply. The single ply, again, is made of sole bend. It's the inside of a double ply belt. So the inside of a double ply belt will be about the same color as the outside of a single ply, if that makes sense. But skirting, it's just a different type of leather. And so it's going to take on the pigment a little bit different. It tends to go a little bit darker. Sometimes they take on like a nice, I really like the warm brown hue that it turns out. We also are going to coat this with 2 coats of that harness oil on the skirting. So you coat it, you let it soak all the way through, and put a second coat. Single ply is going to get the same thing. It's going to get the same 2 coats, but you'll quickly see the difference as they start to dry in the end color. Yeah, and the kind of the cool part is, like, as we're oiling these belts, they really start to take on kind of unique characteristics, and a lot of times the really interesting parts of the grain will start to come out. This is that phase to where you'll start to see that.
People ask all the time about the price difference between these belts and some of the other belts, especially the really popular belts that you see online. And like, if you go to Amazon and you search weightlifting belt, this is what's going to pop up. And if you look at the piece of leather that we use for our single ply belt and look at this belt, this stuff is thicker than this whole belt. And again, they've dyed this brown here. This is actually made out of the same split leather of this other guy that I showed you. So it's a lot cheaper, but what you're getting is also a lot different. It's important to know that. There are other differences too. If you look at the buckle that they use, there's a seam in this roller, and what'll happen is, as you use this, this will start to open up at the edges, and as that rolls along your belt, it's going to tear up your belt over time. And so what we have is a roller that's just seamless. There's no seam in it. You can also tell just the gauge of the steel that they use on the pins is completely different. The rivets, what they use here, this is like a decorative, I call them button rivets. On this other guy, I've actually taken a screwdriver and popped a couple of those off. And if you look at what those are, this is just a small piece of, I think it's aluminum, and it's really just a small decorative rivet meant to be used on a bag or something like that, versus the pop rivets that we use on our guys. All right, so after we've oiled it on the double ply, the next step is to glue these two. We'll do a couple coats of a contact cement on both these pieces. In the beginning, when we talked to Rip, he actually wanted us to try to make a belt without using any glue at all, because the glue does add a little bit of stiffness. In the end, we talked him out of it because of all the other downstream problems that come with that. If you can imagine trying to hold 2 of these together with no glue while you punch a bunch of holes and then keep those holes lined up while you sew the belt, you can see why you need something to stick this together. On the leather belt, the glue does less of a job of holding it together after the belt is sewn, whereas on a suede belt, suede can peel, leather can't. So the glue is much more critical, say, on a suede belt than it is on a leather belt, but we still do use the glue to hold it together. After the glue dries, we'll stick these guys together. You get one shot at this. And I'm basically just trying to line up the 2 edges as perfect as I can, all the way down. Alright, so once you get that stuck, come back with a little bit of pressure. Make sure it's really stuck. The next step after this will be to sand this edge down. Like I said before, it's impossible to get it absolutely perfect, so we'll sand and finish this so it's nice and smooth, and then we'll take it over to the clicker press and punch out all the holes at both ends. In terms of what we use to make these belts, it's a little bit different between the single ply and the double ply. The single ply, as it sounds, is a single piece of leather. It starts out as this piece of, it's called sole bend, So shoe sole leather, and bend just refers to the part of the hide that it's cut from. And this will end up being edged, holes punched. We'll use a machine that I'll show you later to actually thin down this area so we can fold it around the buckle, and it's assembled out of this single piece of leather. The double ply takes this same piece of leather that we used on the single ply, and we made it up with another piece of top grain leather called skirting. And this becomes the outside piece. The sole bend for the single ply becomes the inside piece. And these will be glued and sewn together, and then holes punched, ends cut, similar to the single ply.
All right, so once your belt is glued up or oiled up in the case of a single ply, we're ready to click and basically click out the shapes of the belt, right? So the buckle end and then where all your holes are. We use that using a clicker press and clicker dies. So these we've had made. This kind of looks like the buckle end of your belt before we fold it over and attach all that hardware. And then we've got a separate end with all your holes, and like that billet end, this is where that starting strength logo is going to go later. All right, I'm going to click the single ply first. All right, so this is that start of a single ply belt. And your double ply, ready to go?
What am I doing? Am I waiting on me?
Yeah, we're
Yeah,
doing
you
it.
Okay, I thought you were going to set
He's
it up.
gonna let you do the single ply.
Oh,
I'll show
okay.
you. I'll
All right.
let you get in there. And
All
I'll
right.
be the... You're gonna put that
So
guy,
the-
you can kind of see where I'm clicking him diagonal.
Yeah,
Yep.
the rundown is basically got a mark right at the end where that's going to go.
Yep.
All right. The only way you can mess this up is if like this were hanging off the end where it's
Right.
not under the part that's going to move. So just make sure that you're lined up on that point.
Okay.
You can use this foam to make sure you're straight with the belt. Make sure that end and this end is all
under the...
all up under there, and you got it set. So basically, once you get it like you want it, you swing that around, ride the buttons all the way down, don't let go, and it'll release, and then you can let go of the buttons.
Okay.
Yeah.
How many? What's the PSI?
You'll be
Six-
hitting it with a little over 10 tons.
All right.
10 tons.
10
Yeah,
tons.
so line this up
20-ton
with the
press,
edge.
you're
Use your
number
fingers
6,
to get it
It's
balanced.
about half of my squat. All right.
You owe these guys $80 if you mess this up.
It's fine.
Pretty good.
Is that-
yeah,
is that okay?
Eyeball it.
cost.
Okay.
And then usually I'll do kind of this
Okay.
and make sure I feel an even amount of foam hanging off on each side. Just as even as you can get it, and then we'll check you.
Okay. All right. Check me.
Alright. I think that is pretty good. Double check that it's over
Sure.
every part of your belt and your die. And then you double click at the same time and it'll do it for you. Awesome.
The end comes off clean. That's a good sign.
Do we do anything with this?
We can hang on to it to test out the
Yeah.
stand. Give you a dry run on that.
Okay. You need to sell that.
After sanding the edge and punching all the holes out, we're left with kind of a sharp edge on these belts, and so we want to just round that over to give a nice smooth edge here. We've got several different hand tools that we use. This first guy is just kind of what's called a common edger. It's good for doing your long straight lines. And then we've got other kinds, this little guy with a hole in it, it's called a bissonette, and that's better for going around any curves or anything like that. So it doesn't take off a ton of material, but it rounds that over really nice. this. We got good stitches on top. There's no missed stitches. There's no thread breaks or thread fraying or anything. And then same thing on the bottom. None of the stitches have popped out or showing. So far so good. So we ended up with a good circle around the holes. Again, all the stitches are good, no missing stitches, no frayed or broken thread. Same thing on the back side, so got a good belt so far.
We're back to our clicker press, and this is how we're going to stamp or emboss all of our starting strength belts. All right, so we're going to stamp the single ply first. We made a little helper to make sure our stamp's always in the right place. And then you get a nice fresh starting strength belt. And at this point, this single ply is ready to be made. There you go. And that's your double ply, ready to be assembled.
So to finally put this all together, this is the double ply, and this area right here that we got to fold over for the buckle. I'm just going to add some water in here. This will help get the bend. We'll add a little bit of water to the top side too. This will help make sure that we don't crack anything when we go to bend this. All right. Put a buckle in there. Couple of rivets. Make sure it's lined up. Second one. Grab our loop from earlier. Pick this up and make sure we get it shoved up there and make sure it's good and in the center. Alright, and that's it. We got a belt.
We really are a small business when we say that Blake and I hand make every belt, which is what you'll get if you get an email from us. Hopefully you see today that we really do. We make every belt together. We ship every belt together. We started this when we were still working full-time as a side business, and it's now become our livelihood, and we're super thankful, and we hope to see it grow as the strength community grows.
Yeah, try us out, guys. If you want a really good quality belt really fast, we'll be happy to make you one. And that way we don't have to go back to the jobs.
Yeah.